Welcome everyone to another Ram Dass Fellowship live stream. It's really great to be together tonight. I'm Jackie Dobrinska. I'm the Director of Education and Community for Love, Serve, Remember Foundation. And you all of you tuning in, you are the Ram Dass Satsang, the Ram Dass community, this sacred community of folks with hearts and minds and a compass pointed to truth. And we come together once a month for these gatherings to hear from wisdom keepers of our time and to share tools and practices that will help us navigate this thing we call the human predicament, this curriculum we've all signed up for, especially in these times. And I have the incredible pleasure of working with these two women on a weekly basis as we co-create the Ram Dass Women's Satsang. We've been doing it for over 2 years now. And they've been dedicated students of Ram Dass for over 20 years. And I love our conversations. They're the highlight of my week because it's this like co-created Dharma talk filled with incredible wisdom and inspiration and authenticity. And so we all get to tap into that a little bit tonight. So to tell you a little bit about them, Amy, she's this brilliant artist and illustrator and art educator. And she's also a certified integrative thanatologist and death educator, where she performs final rites of passage and serves as a leader in her Jewish burial society. Julie is an inspiration as well. Her professional career is devoted to advancing environmental and social justice, and she does it with this open and vulnerable heart and dedicated spirit. She also serves as both a Jewish and Buddhist chaplain in the jails within the justice movement and for people experiencing loss, grief, and trauma. She's a death educator, burial society leader, and artist, and is pursuing ordination as a rabbinic pastor. And they both just co-wrote, assembled, a beautiful graphic novel right here called You Are the Universe. It's sourced from 5 decades of Ram Dass recordings, and it's illustrated with these beautiful watercolors. And in it, they share his life story as well as his teachings through his own words. And there's lots of honesty and humor, and it really focuses on sort of a teen and an adult of all ages perspective, with this like inspiration for understanding universal truths and navigating our paths with compassion and awareness and just living a meaningful life. And that's really what we're here to talk about tonight, about this curriculum, about these teachings that provide critical guidance, especially during these times of inevitable suffering, things like mental health issues and climate and political divisiveness. So that's what we're going to jump into this evening. And for those of you who have not been to one of these before, I just want to give you some of the logistics. So we'll be together for about 75 minutes. The first half will be a short meditation and sort of talk, and then we'll jump into Q&A. You can type in your questions at any time from whichever platform that you are watching from, and then I'll weave them into our conversation. And I'll try to get to as many as I can. So with that, I just invite you all to tap in to your heart, to this field of loving awareness, and shine all of that onto these beautiful women, Julie and Amy. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks for having us.
So glad you're here.
Yeah, we're so glad to be here. And we are so blessed in the satsang that's fed us in so many ways. So thank you all. And so we are Amy and Julie, like Jackie introduced us, and just a quick bit about us. And then we'll jump into a meditation and highlight some of these teachings, and then open it up tonight for Q&A or even just some general sharing. So we are parents of kids ages 14 to 18, and we couldn't be more blessed to have Ram Dass's guidance in our life. we came to Ram Dass's teachings when we were teens, and now we're parenting teens, and just kind of thinking about all the issues that are facing all of us today, specifically teens too. So when we began to write this book, we really looked at this vast array of teachings through the lens of these eyes, the kids' eyes today, but also people who are new to Ram Dass teachings. And we really dove into a great and incredible exploration of these teachings in a way that taught us so much about where we were when we first received these teachings and where we are today. So tonight, we want to lift up these essential core teachings from that perspective of the kind of new and curious eyes and ears of teens, and also people who haven't ever been exposed to Ram Dass teachings, but also knowing that people in this satsang are very steeped in these teachings. We want to highlight and ask our audience to join us in an exploration through really beginner's mind tonight as a way to navigate these tumultuous times. So, Julie, you want to lead us in a meditation?
Yeah. So tonight we'll lift up not only stuff that's in this book, but also other lectures and words of Ram Dass, some wisdom that's helpful. So let's just ground for a minute in our chair or wherever you're sitting, lying, resting, and I'll just read a little bit of Ram Dass's words as he drops into meditation. So he says, when you're ready to meditate, close your eyes and bring your attention to the motion of your breath as it enters and leaves your nostrils. Keep your focus at the nostrils, noting the full passage of each in-breath and out-breath from beginning to end. Now, don't follow the breath into your lungs or out into the air. Just watch its flow in and out of the nostrils. If you can, notice the subtle sensations of the breath as it comes and goes. Be aware of each inhalation and each exhalation as it passes by the nostrils, just as the doorman watches each person who comes and goes through a door. And attend to the feeling of the breath. Don't try to imagine it or visualize it. Just note the sensation of the breath, just as it is, exactly as you feel it. We can open our eyes now and just remember that sometimes it can be an embodiment practice. We can just feel the breath in our body, coming and going, being breathed.
All right, so from a calmer space, let's bear witness. So it's no surprise that we live in a chaotic world. So a beautiful talk, you can all find this on YouTube. It's called In the Face of Chaos. Ram Dass gave a lecture in 1994. And somewhere like in the beginning to the middle of the talk, he starts to highlight teachings from a study that was taken in 1940. And it was a sampling of teachers from a school. I think he said it was a New York Times article, and it was titled Teachers' List of Biggest School Problems. In 1940, it was talking out of turn, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, getting out of turn in line, wearing improper clothing, and not putting trash in the wastebasket. So 50 years later, 1990, the biggest problems that teachers highlighted was drug and alcohol abuse, pregnancy and rape, robbery, assault, and suicide. So 30 years later, here we are. This is a same teachers, sampling of different teachers, 2020, 30 years later. Adding to the list, all those were on there. Drug abuse, pregnancy, rape, blah, blah, blah. Bullying and cyberbullying, student verbal abuse and other acts of disrespect for teachers, student sexual harassment of other students, and student harassment of students based on sexual orientation or gender identity, social anxiety, general anxiety, test anxiety, panic attacks, family problems, relationship difficulties, lack of energy or motivation, hopelessness, overwhelm, low self-esteem, loneliness, poverty, dropouts, home and food insecurity, eating disorders, obesity, child abuse, physical and mental abuse, gang violence, drug overdose, mental and physical abuse. It's heavy. I don't even hear on this list climate catastrophes or death or any number of things that we know that our youth and even us or even our grandparents or great grandparents are dealing with today. Ram Dass says, let the implications of that sink in for a second. It's easy to get freaked and say, isn't this horrible? But just for an experiment, let's look at it as it is. It's new. It's certainly a more intense climate. He says, I can do one of those lists and comparisons for practically every dimension of our life. So the fact is, I don't know if I said this earlier, we could have titled this talk Living in Balance, or Keeping Your Eyes Open in Hell, or Keeping Your Heart Open in Hell, like Ram Dass talks about. But at the same time, there's this negative news. Let's also keep in mind, this is an incredible time of blessings. We can hold both or multiple truths at once. And this is a time of great joy. There's advances in science and technology, public and global health. There's so many things that we could count our blessings for. And I think Ram Dass would encourage us all to spend time to think about balancing both with a neutral perspective and just seeing it as it is, just the way it is. He says that I would feel that you and I are in the remainder of our lives facing some profound change. We face the potential of coming very close to chaos. So knowing this, knowing that we're facing chaos, knowing that we're living in tumultuous times, at the same time we are balancing great joy and blessings, what happens when our stability is threatened? What can we do to operate from an open heart and not our minds and the limitations of our minds? What can we do to embrace this change and not see it as a threat? And I think Ram Dass, as we all know, talks about living with uncertainty and just accepting that change is inevitable and affects all of us, no matter what our circumstances are. He says, you and I are in a training program to find a place in ourselves and in the way we live our lives where we are not so dependent on the forms of existence that we freak when it changes, that we freak in the presence of increasing chaos, because it's going to be at that moment where those people who have some tiny degree of equanimity will be that thing around which we can coalesce a shift that is healing instead of ultimately destructive. And I think for our youngest audience here tonight, and I know there's many of you, and I want to welcome you and just say you are part of the community and you're so valued here, that we have a wise elder, a spiritual grandfather, if you will, that's here to guide the way and role model for us, actually, no matter how old we are. And I think Ram Dass had a beautiful quote, and I don't know if you all saw the blurb about tonight's teaching. It doesn't matter what age you are. Let's appreciate that we can all come together at any age and know that we're all in this together. So He says, so what we can do to increase our capacity for equanimity, and I just want to say equanimity for our youngest listeners is a sense of balance, a sense of really balancing the scales, not, going crazy, not living in ultimate bliss or denial or something. So we're balancing it both. Equanimity is balance. We can increase our capacity and support ourselves, each other, and the next generations. He says that we can do that easily by just working on ourselves. That's what help you offer. You work on yourself through everything in your life. Suffering is inevitable for all of us. Our curriculum has to do with that is what our curriculum has to do with. As our hearts dictate, doing what we can to relieve suffering. And ultimately, what we can do to relieve suffering is be that which is able to be in the presence of suffering without creating more suffering. It's like learning to keep your eyes open in hell, just looking at what is. This is a heartfelt act of service to ourselves and humanity. So some of the teachings we want to explore tonight are going to be maybe remedial to some of you all joining us. But again, join us with beginner's mind and let's see if it helps you to deepen in your own practices or shake something up a little or change something that, I don't know, helps you maybe live more holistically in these practices that you probably incorporated many, many years. So I don't want to discount that. So one of the things that Ram Dass talks about is, and I want to highlight this first and foremost, because as we move tonight, we want to talk about the witness. And what that means is we want to witness our lives from our soul's perspective. So our ego operates on this plane of existence that we speak with each other and we act with each other and we interact with the world around us from our ego that has feelings and emotions. But we also have a really dynamic part of ourself that is the soul. And the soul sees things through, I don't know if it's Krishna Das who says the movie of me, and they can really sit back and just watch the movie unfold without any attachment. And so you can cultivate that witness. And Julie's going to go into some practices that we can do to help you really calm and appreciate what is from a neutral space without any attachment or anger and resentment or expectations and hopes. It's good to have goals, but there's also a part of us that can just sit back and explore who we are and how our life is unfolding and why we're living the lives we are and why we're presented with the challenges that we are today and the opportunities and gifts, and just see it for what it is, just very neutrally. And so as we explore the rest of this tonight, we're going to talk about those. And one of the ways we can really tap into this soul's perspective is by spiritualizing our life. And what does that mean to have a spiritual life? He says you can take the stuff of your daily life and offer it up. You begin to consecrate your life. Instead of God being some kind of abstraction that you deal with on Sundays, or that was connected with your parents, or that is something nice, you begin to recognize this as your true identity. This is you. You are this spiritual being, this higher power. It's in all of us. He says, all that you do to maintain your life, your everyday work and play, all your attempts to earn a living should be done with sincerity, love, and devotion from a firm conviction that true living means virtually perfecting one spiritual existence in tune with the universe. So how do you live a life that you offer up your life to God or a higher power? And I think Ram Dass is the perfect example. He shares teachings on things that he's done in his life for anything that feels meaningful. So maybe you sit down to a meal. We're so blessed to have a meal in front of us. Instead of just diving into your dinner, he talks about blessing your food. This is a beautiful practice. blessing your food, acknowledging who grew your food, the digestive process that you have been gifted with. These are things like that. So just the mundane things that you can do. Ram Dass talks about a concept called Guru Kripa. Maybe many of us do this. Is there a way to deepen in this practice of living your daily life, the normal things that you would normally do, but can you offer it up as in honor of a teacher, a beloved grandparent, or someone who dies, something in someone's memory? Living a meaningful life in a way that also remembers who paved the way for you to be here. It's just a simple act that you can just set your intention with. So whether you're new to that practice or you've been doing this for a long time, maybe we can incorporate more of that element. These little things can help us navigate this uncertainty and this horrible heartbreak, but also these beautiful blessings. Another thing Ram Dass teaches us about is creating a sacred space. So wherever you are, whether you're in the car or a corner of your room, Ram Dass can really, be an example. He had these little puja tables or spaces where he could sit down and read prayer or meditate or sing or chant the divine names of God, and look at holy pictures, light a candle, burn incense. This could be under a favorite tree in your yard. This could be in your car. This could be any simple act of sacred space. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to continue on, and Julie's going to deepen our awareness around creating a sacred space in your heart and mind.
Yeah, I like, Amy, what you had shared about sort of consecrating our activities and dedicating our acts in ways that can serve others. Ram Dass talked a lot about quieting your mind, opening your heart, and contributing to the relief of suffering. He kind of went on as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute, about not creating additional suffering. And I think one of the ways to quiet our mind, to open our heart and not contribute to additional suffering and to work for the relief of suffering, is through meditation. It's an opportunity for us to explore this, sort of eternal question that we're all asking, no matter what age we're at: who am I really? And Ram Dass says meditation is really about getting free. He says the game isn't to be a good meditator, it's to end up free. And he talked a lot about different techniques or methods, he called them, for meditation, because there's a lot of different ways to meditate. But the goal of meditation, no matter what the task is to really let go of our thoughts. And that gives us a sense of spaciousness, of some silence, some equanimity, like Amy was talking about, and creating this sort of balance to get out of the dramas of our life and give us the ability, or at least to practice the ability, to observe. It's not always easy. It doesn't matter how long we've been meditating for, whether we're new to meditation, whether we've been doing it for 50 years. It's a practice. And that means that every opportunity we have to meditate is a new opportunity, beginner's mind. Every time we sit in meditation or walk in meditation or whatever the activity is that might be the meditation, it's new. And we have that new opportunity every time to think about liberation, really. And so that's one technique of quieting our mind and opening our heart. But Ram Dass created an entire life really around compassionate social action. And he talked a lot about, like Amy was saying, dedicating our work, our service in the world to the contributing to or ending the relief of suffering. And there's so many ways to do this. He talked a lot about seva, or this concept of selfless service. He even helped to start an organization called Seva. But one thing I want to lift up is when we think about compassionate social action, Ram Dass's teacher, Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, talked a lot about feeding everyone or serving everyone. And one of the hardest teachings for Ram Dass was this concept to love everyone. And he wrestled with, what if there's people I don't like? What do I do in the world with the people that I don't like? And the teaching is, and we come back to this all the time, is to love the soul. You don't have to like the incarnation, but to love the soul. And that in and of itself is a practice. And when we think about compassionate social action, some people wrestle with the other or the enemy or the opposition. It's kind of fortuitous. We're in the United States, and I know there are elections going on everywhere in the world. But when Ram Dass talked about loving everyone, he said, you can reject the action, but not the person. And at one point, he even put people that he really wrestled with, or maybe even didn't like, on his altar, his puja table, to meditate on who that person is and what they represent, or what maybe he identifies with them as. And there are ways and practices to work with that, the person that you don't like, or the institution that you are opposing. But compassionate social action is doing the work of service in the world from a place of love, from a place of loving kindness or loving awareness. And it's really coming from a place of truth. He says this example is, it's liberating to resist another person politically, for example, yet see them as another soul. He says, like particular politicians are full of shoddy, manipulative deceit. It happens. But I also know that they're fellow souls, just like I am, and that they can grow just like we all can grow. And so he talks about keeping his mind and heart soft and open, and we can do that through meditation. We're on the eve of a pretty historic midterm election. And Ram Dass talked a lot about not only compassionate social action from a justice-centered space, but he also talked about voting, for example. And I'll just read to you a little bit from his words. Some of you may have heard this, some of you might not have. He was talking about what trips us up in our compassionate social action. Sometimes it might be that we don't like the person. Sometimes it might be we don't want to do the action. And so he says there are other mindsets that prevent us from taking action. For example, you're a part of a government, whether you like it or not, and not voting is voting. If you're saying, I'm not having anything to do with politics because it's too dirty and because I don't approve of it, then forget it. You're abdicating or rejecting your responsibility to society. It's as simple as that. I think we're at an interesting moment within the shift of collective consciousness. Interesting that he said this many years ago, because I think we would say this now. Some people talk about the Kali Yuga or this time of great tumult or potential for transition, shift. But anyways, he says specifically around the way in which we're integrating the changes in power structures. How is the shift in collective consciousness going to evolve? And what part do you play? And I think we're all asking ourselves that right now. What part do I play in this? He says part of the curriculum of life is looking at the systems that you're a part of and being able to say, that system needs work. It's important to be able to shift your game so that you're not simply pushing the system away and saying, I don't think about that stuff because it's too complicated. Let somebody else worry about it. Honestly, he says, your inaction may be standing in the way of everybody's survival. Since we must act, we must do the best we can to act consciously and compassionately. But in addition, we can make every action an exercise designed to help us become free. So maybe that's a good place to close on that. But this concept of personal and collective liberation, we're all connected in ways, whether we like it or not. And I think through Ram Dass's modeling of compassionate social action, he's saying there are ways we can drop in to be very helpful right now. Um, and I just tie it back to his words around the different stages of life. They're just stages, and yet the through line is there for all of us, no matter what our age is. So want to encourage everyone to consider ways in which you can engage in compassionate social action and center in meditation to quiet your mind and open your heart to contribute to the relief of suffering and not cause additional suffering to yourselves and others.
So with that, maybe if this is the appropriate time, Jackie, we can
Sure.
kind of open it up. And
Yeah. So I'll just remind people, or for those who are tuning in, that you can ask questions at any time. All you need to do is type it into the chat. And then Gina is on the back end and she feeds them to me. And then I'll ask them for you. So please send any questions that are coming up into the chat. So, one of the things, Julie, when you were talking about voting and acting and what's ours to do, it reminds me actually of this Thich Nhat Hanh quote, um, where he's talking with someone at Plum Village who works in a nuclear, like in nuclear power in some way, and the guy's like having some like crisis of conscious, like, oh, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing in the world? Like, and Thich Nhat Hanh responds to him and says, you're here, which means that you have some level of consciousness. And so, yeah, you need to stay in that position because we need people with consciousness in positions like that. Whoops, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, I think about that too. Ramdas tells a great story about how, he was working with people in politics, speech writers and stuff, and he basically was saying like, who is in the White House providing spiritual counsel? But he also worked with people in venture capitalism, um, to sort of add that layer of consciousness as well. Do what you do in the world, but do it consciously.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't all have to
I'm
jump
gonna
out of
add,
it. Go
yeah,
for it,
really
Mimi.
quick, because he also says at this, in this conversation, we're talking about, well, what can we do? What is my path? And I think it's important, our dharma, the way, the path, let's just define that really quick. Dharma, he says it, appropriate action is the right way of living. But understand that what you hear at one moment may be different than what you hear at another moment later in life. It's constantly changing. And from a meditative space, you will hear the way your dharma is evolving. So let's really embrace, as we grow and change and evolve, so does our path, and so does our ability to affect change and the way we operate in the world. I think that's.
Yeah, I remember Ramdas was talking to someone in a Q&A, and they were asking about their job, and basically he was like, you don't have to quit your job. You don't need to drop out of society. You can go live in a cave and be a sadhu and meditate all day and chant mantra if you like, but live fully in the role that you have right now. Change your job if you want to, study something different in school if you want to. But the point was for him was just be as conscious as you can in whatever you're doing right now. Do you work in sales? You're feeding the hungry? It's all beautiful. It's all an opportunity.
Yeah. It's all
Putting one
an
foot.
opportunity for awakening. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so this idea of dharma or duty or what's ours to do, earlier we were talking about teens and this like sense of overwhelm. And I think many of us can relate, and I think this is one of the reasons teens have a lot of anxiety, or all of us do, is this like sense of the weight of the world on our shoulders, like this, all of the intensity. And like in the face of that, what is ours to do? Do you have words of wisdom for, especially for teens or for parents of teens, of like navigating that question?
Go ahead, Julie.
Well, first, I want to acknowledge that it is a lot sometimes. And just a recognition that this is we're coming out of a global pandemic. Social media makes life really intense sometimes. We have been, at least most folks have been for the past 2 years plus, isolated. Ram Dass talked a lot about the difference between loneliness or just being alone. And sometimes I really love that movie of me. It helps to just pull the camera back a little bit.
Mm.
What are we noticing in our body? What are we noticing in our heart or mind? And just to sit with that and become familiar with the thoughts. But then also, like he talked about meditation, watch them leave or fizzle.
Mm.
I guess part of my advice too would be Ram Dass loved community.
Mm.
And there's something so special about satsang or spiritual friendship or spiritual community. We might, and he talked about this too, we might not like everyone in the satsang, but they're our buddies on the path. And he also says, like, you can't fall off the path. You might feel lost, but this is it. And so just to know and trust that you are headed in the right direction, you're here, breathing, headed in the right direction, and you're not alone. It sometimes can be a dark or lonely path at times, but he talked about creating opportunities for connection. And so I don't know, Amy, if you want to add to that, but I would just come back to his teaching about being here now, being fully present in the moment, as dark or as joyful and wonderful or horrible as it is. Center in the truth of right now and know that it's impermanent. It's changing all the time. With each new breath, it's changing. And sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's beautiful. And it's not binary either. There is no binary. It's all here.
Love that. Thank you, Amy.
I just think you both touched on it beautifully, and it's just learning how we don't get caught in the drama. We don't. And he said it so beautifully one time. It's learning how to extricate yourself from the drama. So you can be present and you can act to relieve suffering and you can do all this. And you can also be in the moment by pulling back, removing yourself from the drama, removing yourself from the moments that create such tremendous suffering, so you can really tap into that neutral witness like we talked about earlier. And I think just learning to befriend that aspect of yourself, and you can do that in a number of ways: exploring teachings, listening to meditations, satsang. He says it takes courage to show up. It takes so much courage to show up when you've been isolated, or when you're suffering, or when you're scared, or when you're hurting, you have a broken heart, somebody died, or you're dying, or whatever the case may be. And it's learning to see yourself neutrally without labeling yourself. You aren't a person. You aren't an ill person. You're a person with illness. You aren't a lonely person. You're a person with loneliness. Learning to separate the neuroses or the pathology from the personality and the person is a really good tool to have in your toolbox. And showing up in community who is also trying to do the same thing is an important teaching, I think, for parents, who are watching their children suffer, or, fielding the hurt of the day, or whatever it might be. These are teachings that we can not only model for our children, but invite them in, teach them as you would want to be taught as a child, and seeing them as a mature adult, evolving partner in life. And I think that kind of approach where, it's all of us together is
I would also just add to, Ram Dass talked about, and I think we can all relate, no matter what age we're at, judging himself for so many years because he was trying to fit into this expectation, be good, do good, be successful. And he really judged himself and almost hated himself for many, many years as a child and into his 20s and 30s, and came to find love within his own heart for himself,
Mm.
and to drop the judgments and to let some of the anger go. Um, and I think some of us really struggle with loving ourselves or accepting ourselves because maybe we don't feel it from other people. But watching Ram Dass, as this wise sage elder in like complete bliss, saying over and over again, I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. To know that it is possible to go from such self-loathing or self-hatred to complete bliss and believing that he is pure loving awareness, and also wanting that for us too. I think it gives a lot of us hope when we're struggling with our own identity, or wrestling with our own sexuality and acceptance from our family, or wrestling with our own, shortcomings. And I put that in quotes because what is a shortcoming? Um, and so, just holding a little bit of tenderness. He talked a lot about that too. In his 20s, he tried to, and into his 30s, he tried to do a lot of work around accepting himself just as he is. And he got to a place where he was like, this is me, take it or leave it. This is me. And whether or not he believed it at first, and then he started to believe it as well. So I don't know. I mean, it gives me hope too, just knowing what that was like as a teenager, and in our early 20s. Especially for people that are still navigating the identity question in a place that might not be so hospitable to the identity you think you want to own publicly.
Yeah. I think that's all really, really helpful. Just that the self-acceptance. And one of the things that I loved how you talked about how that helped you, um, as you were growing up. And there's like this other side of the coin that I just want to mention for a moment, because sometimes we can hear teachings and we can use them as measuring sticks. Oh, now I'm supposed to be self-accepting. And what if I'm not? And just this reminder of, the mind is this really double-edged, it's brilliant. It has such beauty, it has flexibility, it has openness, and it has these habits that were survival habits, around these things that you were talking about, around like things are always going to be permanent, around this idea that I'm separate and I have to keep myself safe. And that those are just sort of defaults that we go into. And that these things that you're talking about are like, they're these sweet practices to help us remember that those evolutionary ideas aren't the whole of us, right?
Mhm.
And so, when we start to feel overwhelmed because we feel separate, or are alone, or we feel like it's always going to be like this, just the tiny small things we can do to be
Yeah,
helpful.
one of the things, I mean, I kind of have a little giggle about it too, because that is so serious and it's so true how we say, like, oh, we should on ourselves, right?
Right.
Um, but Ramdas said after all his years of all his work, he didn't lose his words, he didn't lose a single neuroses. He just had a different relationship with them. He
Yeah.
called them little schmooze.
Yeah.
So he would say, like, oh, there's, this one thing that has tripped me. Here you are again, this one thing that trips me up from time to time, or this other thing that, yeah,
Yeah.
he said, he talks openly about that.
Yeah, changing it's just like the awareness and the incredible compassion that needs to be developed every single day for just being human, especially in a culture that has us striving for perfection and striving to be different or better, or all the advertising that comes through us, especially not through social media. So it almost seems like it's coming through our friends, right? These messages that can be really, really toxic to our
Right, calls it
mind state.
work on ourselves. We
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Rework. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something that you said earlier that I also wanted to bring some aware, like just dig into a little bit deeper. Because you've brought it up a couple of times, is this space of neutrality. And
Mm.
again, our minds are so tricky, that it can also be this, like, again, striving, like, oh, I'm supposed to be neutral. And it almost ends up that we put it on as like a mask and bypass some of the things, like, I'm not supposed to feel my anxiety. I'm not supposed to feel scared. I'm supposed to just be the neutral witness to all of it. So I'm hoping you can speak into that, and especially with teens, how that might show up and how we might navigate it skillfully.
Yeah, it's not a dissociation from our emotions. It's a real recognition of what we're feeling. And we can watch it and we can say, I am feeling depressed right now. Wow, look at that depression. I am really sad, or I'm really scared, or I'm really, whatever you might be feeling and noticing, and acknowledging that and accepting it. And like Julie was saying, invite that in, feel what that feels like. He's saying, notice that, but not to get caught up in that. Like, I'm a depressed person, and amp it up. I'm always going to be depressed, or whatever you do in your head. And it's just really, and I think what he's saying when he says quiet the mind so we can open the heart, sometimes we don't have to give voice to that. We can sit there and say that. I'm not suggesting to, ignore that and not give voice to that, especially if you are feeling suicidal or just totally despondent and depressed. And that's not it at all. But, just to sit in a quiet moment with yourself and just notice it. And then to see that we are all human. We all experience that. It is totally normal and natural. And yet, can we just say, who's watching the watcher? Who's noticing the depression? Who's noticing the loneliness and fear? And it's that soul level response. And by getting very quiet, Ram Dass had a stroke. And after his stroke, he said it really forced him to go inside himself and sit there. And instead of saying, how can I help? He began to say, how can you help me? And he really came to know what it means to ask for help. So at the same time, we're noticing our depression, our anxiety. How can we ask for help? And do you have community? Do you have somebody that you can ask for help? And I think by getting very quiet and sitting in meditation, and meditation can look like a number of things. It can be even using your imagination to talk to somebody who's passed on, or even your higher self. It's asking for help, and as you're noticing. And so I think that's a good
Yeah.
practice.
I think one thing that can happen is, when we sit, sometimes we sit in our rumination. We sit in the loops of the thoughts, which can be really painful and sort of reinforce the loops. And there's different ways out of it. And sometimes in my past, I know when they were really strong, like, it was, my way out was to listen to the birds, right? To actually, and you talked about this, Julie, earlier, about, and like, this is Ram Dass's theme, like, to be here now, like the depth of this moment. Like, really, usually things for me in my privileged world, they're okay. And I have this weird analogy, because I know you're, Amy, you're an herbalist as well, but the antidote for the sting of stinging nettle is in the juice of the leaf. And so it's the depth that matters, right? And I have that sense of the moment. I think of that image in being here now, that if I can get into the depth of this moment and out of the thoughts of future or past, and maybe the depth of the moment is starting by listening to the birds,
Yeah.
that
Watching the ocean.
it can pull me out and give me just that little bit bigger perspective, right? Of like, oh, I don't have to like try to be the witness. Like, it just sort of happens. Does that
And
make
I love
sense?
that. I love that question too, because I think a lot of us, no matter what age or no matter what headspace we're in, we can get wrapped up in the method. And Ram Dass talks about that. That's why he was like, you don't think that once you've mastered the technique, that's it, right? Like, try it for a couple of weeks. If it doesn't work for you, try something else. In meditation, you brought up Thich Nhat Hanh, one of my teachers, and he has a beautiful walking meditation. If sitting sends you into a spin, pieces every step and you just walk, or maybe walking is painful for you because of your physical body. So maybe you lie there, or maybe meditation is painting, or maybe it's breath work, or maybe it's your imagination, and you guide yourself on a whole, you take yourself somewhere else, there's all kinds of techniques. And he talks about it, chanting, mantra. Oh
Mhm,
my gosh, the
mhm,
voice.
mhm,
Um, but so is service as
mhm,
as a method.
mhm.
Making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, for hundreds of people and passing those out. Whatever it is, they're connecting in nature, doing pottery. So many.
Yeah. And I think that service piece, again, like this idea of having to, right? And I love the idea of the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like it can be small acts. There's, I don't know where it comes from now at this point. I've used it so many times, but this idea that we're all just one of the arms of the goddess of compassion who has 10,000 arms, right? Infinite arms. And
Yeah.
we don't have to be all 10,000 of them. We just have to do the one thing in front of us. And I know that's a big part of your lives. I've learned a lot from both of you around service. And another one of the quotes that I really like that I think that I originally heard you speak, it was a Ram Dass quote about we work to relieve suffering without attachment to whether suffering ends. I
Work full
wonder,
time. Work
yeah,
full time to end suffering, having no attachment to whether suffering ends.
yeah. How does that come through in your lives? And how does that come through with your teens?
Yeah, Amy, you wanna start us off?
Well, I also just want to acknowledge sometimes working to relieve suffering is just getting out of bed. Like I think I joked about that in the beginning of our talk, but literally it can look like putting one foot in front of the other,
Yeah.
getting out of bed, smiling at yourself in the mirror, these little acts of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we think about teens navigating really any interaction with it at any age, but especially our teens. And I also want to say, Maharaji had this teaching, sub ek, all one, we are all one. These are our teens, these are our grandparents, we are all one family. I just want to say that as we're thinking about next generations. But um, you know, working to relieve suffering is something we can teach our teens in um, the way they interact, even in cyberspace. That is such a new plane of awareness. And I was just thinking about that the other day because compassionate acts of social justice, social kindness, it can happen in this realm of existence. We're using Ram Dass terminology that's so new to so many of us. Like, how do we even navigate a space that is so different dimensional than here and now? And I think this issue of cyberbullying and shaming publicly in that realm too is something that really faces our teens. So even just the small acts of kindness and mindfulness in that space and instilling a real value around kindness in any realm here and now is something that we can really talk to our kids about and that they can relate. And it's just a different space for all of us, I think. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but so I think that's really important, is instilling this value that no matter what you're doing can be, even if it's just a micro act of kindness or service, it's so valuable. So I want to add that. And what do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, all of that is enough. Anything is enough. I think Amy and I started working in the world of death and dying in our 20s. I think maybe I was 19 or 20. I don't really remember at this point, but you know, for us, I think when we experience that sort of that level of impermanence or that level of finality, um, it's pretty easy to witness everything as like this mystical, amazing experience of being alive. It doesn't happen all the time, but that's not something. And Ron has talked a lot about that too, because of his work with death and dying. To see this like preciousness of this, so impermanent, fleeting moments of life. Uh, but the compassionate social action piece, how does it manifest in our life? I mean, I think it's more about, just what Amy was saying, being of service. And I want to, I want to try to stay away from the binary of big and small acts, but we do that. And I guess mean like quick and simple, um, leaving a sweet note for your beloved, knowing they have a big day ahead of them, or, treating yourself to, a nice bath, or whatever, something that brings you great joy or pleasure. It could be towards yourself, but the social action, the piece of, this like helping to repair the world, our fingerprint on, I love that, being a hand of the divine, or even just to be a finger of one of the hands. Oh, that would be amazing. And to find joy in that, to serve others in whatever way is meaningful to you. We're each blessed, I think, with many gifts. And Ramdas talked a lot about find the thing that brings you joy and be of service in that way. And know it's going to change. What's that? And know it's going to change. Yeah. At a different time in your life. Or maybe it won't, or something. But I think it's important to instill this value of being of service. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, when you look at Ram Dass's life, you see that his focus of where he put his energy to serve changed at various times in his life. But it was always there,
Right.
So one of the things you both brought up, and I'm wondering if we can dive a little deeper into it, is keeping an open heart. There's a lot of pain in this world. There's a lot of pain in ourselves. And we have these like protectors that come up. And I'm curious, especially looking at what teens are facing, if you could talk more about techniques or just more about opening your heart in this realm, in this world. How do we do so skillfully? How do we do so authentically?
It's a tricky thing, because when you're learning how to open your heart, I think you can confuse that with be boundaryless, or get walked all over, or enable drama, or I don't know, So it's a big concept to kind of wrap your head around at first. How do you keep your heart open to destruction and devastation and the people that are causing it? And I think when we look to Ram Dass, he would say, for the people that we're struggling with, put them on your puja table, put a picture on them, whether you create an altar in your mind or a physical altar, we don't have to love the role that these people are playing. We have to know that we are all fellow souls, and souls operate on a totally different plane than the person doing the destructive act, or the creating the drama, or gossiping, or whatever the teen drama of the fleeting moment is. But it is super painful. We just went to a funeral for a young boy who committed suicide. No one knew that he was suffering that bad. So when you're suffering that hard and lost in despair, how do you keep your heart open? What does it even mean to have an open heart? And I think that the Ram Dass teaching of quieting the mind, it sounds so simple and just so ridiculous in a way. Quiet your mind. How do you quiet your mind when
you're on social media and everyone knows where you're at every moment, or you're getting texts, or maybe you're not getting texts and no one's reaching out for you. And how do you keep your heart open to people who aren't calling you or aren't showing that they care about you? It's such a tricky thing. And I think if you operate from the place of privilege that we have, many of us have, to be a guide, to be an example, embody the teachings that we've been blessed with, to be a role model for those that are struggling, or even increasing our capacity for empathy and intuition as well. I want to suggest that too. Sitting with people who are struggling, meditating with people, just saying, I hear you, I see you, and do you want to meditate together? I know Julie's work in the jail. I love that. She just goes in and listens to the suffering and then says, can we meditate together? And that really shifts the energy. I know kids could really appreciate even just someone showing up. So it's a big concept, but I think integrating the challenging people into our lives in a way that we can kind of see that visually, and whether that's in our head or physically there, and then incorporating practices where we can increase empathy and intuition in our life in a way that I don't know, just helps us understand that we're all hurting, whether it shows or it doesn't, and quieting our mind. I know it sounds cliche, but just working on meditation. And
I want to read something too in one of my favorite Ram Dass books. I've kept it next to my desk for maybe 20 years. It's a Ram Dass book, How Can I Help? And to your question about opening our hearts, and I so appreciate, Amy, what you said about boundaries, because that is a very different story. That's not what that means. And I'm glad that you pointed that out. But Ram Dass on page 208, it's all, you should see my book, it's all marked up. He says, if we can accept not knowing, and not knowing is a tenet of Buddhism, and I think it's really helpful. And I'm sure you can Google that, or maybe someone's given a great talk here about it. But if it basically is like, that open your heart to not know. We don't know. How can we know everything? We're just open. But if we can accept not knowing, we'll be less likely to get caught in models or theories, or attached to seeing things work out the way we'd like. And then he goes on later to say, our willingness to accept the unknown gives us courage. And sometimes the opening your heart means just sitting with not knowing. I'm not sure why this is happening, or I'm not sure why that happened. I don't know what will happen, that sort of like clinging to the hope for the future. It's good to have, and it's fine to have a hope for the future, for things to, get better, or to change. But sitting with that willingness to accept the unknown gives us courage. If we accept that the ends of our actions often prove unknowable, we're also freer to be focused on the process of our work as it's happening. He's talking about social action, back to social action. You could really apply that to anything. You could apply it to navigating the family Thanksgiving dinner. You could apply it to, your math test on Tuesday, or your big presentation at work, or maybe a relationship that you're in that you think may or may not end. Accepting the not knowing, but also taking responsibility for your actions, your own part in it. Being freer to focus on the process of our work as it's happening. What am I doing? How does it feel in my body? Is this correct? Does going back to the intuition piece, being able to sit in discernment, watching things come up in real time as it arises through the practice of meditation, whatever that means to you. And opening our heart to all the possibility and the full spectrum of, the joys and sufferings the holiness of humanity, um, opening our heart to the great unknown, to this great mystery,
Mm.
that not knowing, that spirit of not knowing,
Yeah.
sort of like a surfer on the wave.
Yeah.
What's next? Is it going to wipe me out? Am I going to get back on my board? Am I going to cruise right into the shore? It could feel amazing. I could also get hit in the face by my board,
Right.
I mean, hopefully you have control of your own, body and your board and all of that, but not knowing.
And I love that, the opening to the great mystery. I think that requires courage and trust in
Yeah.
something, and that I think it requires a little bit of our ego surrender. Um, Something you said, Amy, about wanting, like people not responding, really brought up the story of Ramdas meeting Maharaji for me, and just you hear this around this depth of being seen and all of our humanness, all of our beauty and flaws, and being loved,
Yeah.
and I think there's something so, I mean, clearly there's something so powerful and deep around that, Ram Dass talked about it for the rest of his life. And other people who have that experience, they talk about how it transforms them. And what often happens then for the rest of us that haven't had that experience, we long and yearn for it. We want someone so deeply to see us and open that space of that loving heart, because it's like, oh, if I can be seen and loved, then I
Mhm.
can also love and I can pass that along. Um, and so just getting out of that, this is just me and my thoughts in my head sharing them, but
Yeah.
this idea that we don't necessarily need a guru, like we can give that to ourselves. And I think it's Trudy, could or it might be Diana Poole Heller. They have these kind eye meditations where you surround yourself. Maybe it's Maharaji and Ram Dass, or maybe it's your cat, or maybe it's whales, like who know, like whatever. And just looking at you with that same incredible love
Mm.
and acceptance, and practicing that, and not only seeing it, but letting it in. And I
Right.
think that is one of the things that then allows us to soften the walls that we put up around our own hearts as well.
I just want to, if I can, how are we
Mhm.
doing on time, by the way?
We're probably going to wrap it up in a minute.
Okay, let me just share this one quick
Yeah.
thing and we
Yeah.
can end it on loving awareness. But wait, we had a really big pool of readers, beta readers, when we wrote the book. We had a bunch of teens of various ages, and we were really surprised because look at this is a book about a man who meets his guru, like how far out is that for teens to read? And one of the most favorite, the favorite section of this book for the beta readers was when he met his guru. And
Mm.
so our question and response was like, well, why? Like, well, how did that speak to you? Tell us more about that. It was so incredible. This is their feedback. It was so incredible to know that somebody could feel so loved.
Mm.
Like, that is so amazing that love transferred from Ram Dass's retelling of it to these teens. And so I think that's exactly what you're saying. And if we're talking about opening our heart, maybe we've never felt that love, but I think Ram Dass was a big proponent of using the imagination, even though people thought it was silly. Like, what? You talk to your dead guru? That's all in your imagination. And I think every single one of us have the capacity to close our eyes or keep our eyes open, whatever, and tap into our imagination. Do you want to feel incredible love in this moment? Close your eyes. Imagine you're sitting in front of the most loving being who loves you so much. They know everything about you, every flaw in your life, everything about you, and they love you and they recognize you as love. And Ram Dass said, you might feel so ridiculous meditating on I am loving awareness. I mean, this was his iconic teaching. I am loving awareness.
of course, he says you don't walk into the grocery store and say, "Hi, nice to meet you. I am loving awareness," but you identify as loving awareness. You are that loving awareness. And so let's say you're putting your kids to bed tonight, or you're a teen listening and you don't have parents, or you're 90 and you are isolated right now, and you want to feel incredible love. Close your eyes and say, "I am loving awareness," and know that you are love. I mean, it sounds ridiculous at first, but go there and do that and start to believe it, and then radiate that love outwards. And that, I think, is what Ramdas is saying. We can open our hearts in this way by identifying that we are this love. This love exists in every single one of us, even the assholes in the world, even the challenging people, even the most hurt and heartbroken people who are acting out of reactivity and projection. They're actually loving aware. They're a loving awareness. They're not tapped into it. And that, but we can,
Their soul is loving awareness.
Our soul is loving awareness. Yeah.
That's
so
what the soul
And
is.
the practice is to keep touching back to that, keep trying to remember that part of ourselves, to identify with that part of ourselves.
so it sounds so easy.
It does. And it's a constant lifetime practice.
Constant, no matter what age we are. And I think with a beginner's mind, every day we can wake up and learn again how to radiate love.
Mm-hmm. Without pressure and shoulds, but with just that real sweetness and gentleness. Yeah. Well, as always, it's such an incredible joy to sit and chat with you, and just the wisdom that is in both of you from all of your years of study and practice is such a gift to the world. And I know that we're going to do a closing prayer. And I'm really excited about that. And I want everyone to stick around for that. But I also wanted to just make a couple of announcements before we sign off. And what are they? They are a big thank you to you all. If people want to find out more about you, the best way right now is to go to shop.ramdas.org. That's where You Are the Universe, the book is. People can pre-order that right now, which is great. If you enjoyed this and want to share it with other parents or other friends, please go to the rewatch, which will be available starting tomorrow. It's at ramdas.org/livestream-replays. Also, we do all of these for free, but if you're able to contribute, it really helps us keep doing them. So you can text satsang, SATSANG, to 91999. There's also some links that are in the chat that Gina's been putting up. Big thank you to Gina and JR for making this happen on the back end. And also, if you want to deepen into Ramdas community, you want to be connected, we have a general virtual satsang every other week. The next one's tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What we do is we listen to the Here and Now podcast and then come and we discuss our inspirations and curiosities and learn from each other that way. So you can sign up for those or any of our affinity groups, including the Women's Satsang, or find your local satsang, your local community at ramdas.org/fellowship. If you didn't hear that, I sort of swallowed that last word. It's ramdas.org/fellowship. So I think that's all of it. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Julie and Amy, for this incredible work and this incredible book. And yeah, just such a joy. So yeah, please take us out with your prayer.
Okay, thank you. It was such a beautiful evening just to remind ourselves of this. Nothing more. So we just want to close with gratitude, really gratitude. This satsang has fed us in so many ways. So thank you all. And I just want to offer, may we be blessed with embodied equanimity and balance. May we experience awe and wonder. May we neutrally observe the horrible beauty and the blessings and the suffering and act without expectation or attachment. May we hear just what we need to help us navigate our lives with compassion and without fear. And may we operate from our soul and the loving awareness that we are. Thank you. Lots of love.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Ripple out to everyone.